Why can you remember every single detail from a movie that you have watched only once but forget a physics formula that you have repeated 10 times? The difference isn't your intelligence. It is a biological magnet called curiosity. Learning isn't about how much information that you can force into your brain. It is about how many missing pieces you can identify in the puzzle that you have created. In today's video, we are going to talk about curiosity. So let's start by identifying what is curiosity. Curiosity is essentially the urge to fill the gaps in our knowledge. Think of it in this way. We have a large puzzle in our brains based on our knowledge in a particular subject. But we don't know everything, right? So, which means there are some missing pieces that we should find. The extreme desire to complete the puzzle is called curiosity. Curiosity is a middle ground between what we know and what we don't know. Humans are naturally very curious. Actually, it's the reason why we are here. Someone in history has looked at the oceans and has wondered, was interested in to know who lives in the other side of the ocean. What is in the other side of the ocean? And that's how continents were discovered. That's how we were connected. That's how we were not living as those ancient humans. Or you. You knew that you should learn a subject. You knew that it is very difficult and you have a very little period of time. That's your prior knowledge. Then you wanted to know how to learn that subject faster and thought maybe this video will help me. Here, curiosity has come in the stage. Now we will discuss why curiosity even matters when we are learning mathematics, physics, English, whatever subject. Curiosity positively affects three aspects of learning: attention, memory, and motivation. When we are so curious about finding out the answer, we will be more open to new information. And as a result, we will focus on the data we are consuming. This is what we call attention. In plain words, you don't just read the information. Your brain grabs it, just like a magnet grabs every metal piece. As a result, it will be very, very difficult for you to forget that information. Another important point is that we receive constant dopamine hits when we found every piece of puzzle. Imagine you solving a puzzle. How much happiness do you feel when you find a piece that connects two pieces together? This turns learning into a rewarding process, keeping your motivation high. Okay, you may say, Sevinch, it all sounds promising, but still I have some doubts. So, let me give you some real-life examples from my own experience. While I'm learning mathematics, the physical representation of that puzzle in my mind was a test. I used to solve tests, mathematical tests, covering all topics in that field. There were some questions that I could solve and some questions that I cannot solve. In that case, I always carefully analyzed which missing pieces there are, which questions that I don't know, which questions that I haven't learned yet. And every time when I go to the lesson, I would have only one question in my mind: which pieces I will find today. In other words, which topics I will cover today. This helped me to absorb every single information in the lesson and keep them in my long-term memory. When I'm faced with difficult formulas, I've always asked why. Where does this come from? There is always a link between what we know and what we don't know. For example, in this formula, how these two sides be even equal? I knew simple arithmetic, so when I open brackets, I get the result. Boom! Successfully connected. I know it's pretty straightforward, but it applies to almost every formula. Sometimes we can even connect our interests with subjects that we need to study. For example, In my physics subject, when I was studying about speed, I asked about time machines. Why? Because I learned about speed. I have read about time machines, but there is a gap between them. There is a missing piece over there. So I was really curious to find about, is it even possible to build those time machines? So I asked from my teacher, and I have never forgotten the conversation we had at that time. My preparation to IELTS was also driven by curiosity, because every time teacher checked my essay, I used to ask why it is not 9, and then why it is not 8, and at the end why it's not even 7, because I knew how to write essays. I have read band 9 essays, but there was a gap. I didn't know how to do it. So I had this extreme urge to fill that gap. As a result, I reached the level where I can write band E essays so far. So now we have understood the importance of curiosity. Now it's time to look at how to improve our curiosity and let it flourish. First of all, it's very important to identify and strengthen what we know. Before starting a boring mathematics or English topic, please spend 2 minutes to write down what you already know in this topic or related to this topic. This defines the edges of your puzzles, so it will be much easier for you to find those missing pieces. Remember, how strong your prior knowledge is, such easier it will be to get interested in the topic, to get immersed in the topic. So spend every minute of the lesson effectively. So spend every minute of the lesson wisely. The clearer it gets, the easier it gets. Next thing you can do to support your curious minds is asking questions. You have a question? Ask. You have a doubt? Ask. Something is unclear? Ask. I used to ask a lot of questions, a massive number of questions, I would say. Some teachers even hated me for asking questions. I also hate teachers who don't want to answer any questions. But anyways, if you are afraid of people who call you botanic or mean, please don't just care. Why should you even care about those losers who cannot even focus on their studies, on their lives? Focus on yourself, focus on your learning. Remember, every subject is interesting when you give a room for your curiosity. Thank you for watching. Until the next time. Bye bye.